Welcome, welcome. I feel like we get so desensitized to Trump's approval rating falls from 35% to 33%, which is the lowest of his presidency. So says Reuters Ipsos. It's also the lowest in modern political history coming into a midterm, right?
Oh, I think far and away, it's the lowest. The analogs that people usually go to are Trump on January 7th, 2021,
Right.
or Nixon in the few weeks before he resigned from office. I don't think we've ever seen it this low before a midterm. Look, we don't know what's going to happen in 3 months, or I guess a little less than 3 months right now. And it is true, as a lot of people point out, that the Democratic brand is taking on a lot of water. But I do think the political class, the political conversation in the country hasn't really grappled with just
Yeah.
how bad the environment appears to be for Republicans. Bad for Trump, bad for Republicans, good for Democrats. Just how much is hard to say, but I think it's become kind of a consensus now that not that the Democrats will take the Senate, but that it's very possible and may even be the 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 odds-on probability. And that is remarkable for the same reason that everybody was saying a year ago it's basically impossible because the only seats that are up are
Are
Trump's are
we
Trumply.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in a lot of cases, states that Trump won by big margins,
right.
Texas, Iowa, Alaska, that are
Yeah.
all in contention now.
Yeah,
Ohio.
there are sort of I'm gonna read another very annoying thing, but I think it's important. So there are 7 big Senate races, right? Texas, Michigan, Maine, right? Texas. This is not a Democratic state. Michigan, Maine, right? Michigan is a protecting a seat. Maine could be a flip. Ohio, Iowa, Alaska, and North Carolina. I mean, and Democrats need to win 5 of 7. So they need to protect Michigan, and then they need to win. And this seems not insane, right? North Carolina, they're definitely unless something happens, they're going to win North
Yeah, that they're
Carolina.
they're definitely favored there. I I,
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say that, that North Carolina is only a bit behind Texas as being, a kind of a graveyard of Democratic dreams.
Right.
So I
It's
wouldn't,
true.
I wouldn't take thing as a certainty, but they are certainly the favorites there. There's no question.
Yeah. And Alaska, Potola has been ahead in almost every poll. Iowa is this very interesting moment where they have the cancer, the groundwater, the very good gubernatorial Rob Sand, like
Yep.
just a perfect storm of sort of, you got Obama cutting an ad for Turek. I mean, just sort of a perfect storm of the right kind of Democrats being the right kind of genteel for that state.
Yep. Yep.
Um, Ohio, I think if anyone can win that, it's Sherrod Brown.
hmm
Maine, again, is I think a big question mark. Michigan and Texas.
Texas is one of these sort of extreme. Well, it's definitely an own goal for the Republicans. The question of is it enough of an own goal to overcome the fact that Texas is a pretty Republican state? I mean, we it's a funny thing because I'm trying to remember. I think Beto O'Rourke lost by a couple percentage points, right? I mean, came
Right.
came
And
quite close. So yeah, and it's one of the things that I think is interesting and understandable is that Democrats at this point will see a poll where their candidate is up by 3 or 4 points and will say, okay, it's not looking good, but like we're not out of this. It's still
right.
possible, because they are used to, well,
I
really what
mean,
it comes down to is the 2024 election was a deeply traumatizing experience for all
oh,
Democrats, both at
correct.
the presidential level, but also at the senatorial level.
Yeah.
And in 2020, there were a lot of races that really seemed like Susan Collins was toast, and obviously she wasn't toast. I mean, I'm actually a little more bullish about that race, I think, than some
Yeah.
people are, precisely because Jackson seems like decent enough guy and pretty boring.
My
And
my
you know,
theory of I have 2 theories I want to float to you. So my theory of Maine, I have a theory for Maine and a theory for Texas. So my theory of Maine is that actually Jackson is who Graham Plattner pretended to be. Like,
terms of background. Well, not just
yeah,
like a real Mainer. He's kind of like, from what I understand, from one of these towns where
he's
there's like 300 people and like they've all been, their ancestors have all been living there for 2 centuries, right? And they're
right,
loggers, and
right, and
that's
he's a
kind of a different
logger.
world. Yeah,
Yeah,
yep,
he's
yep.
not like an oyster farmer who's the son of of an investment banker who's the grandson of a designer, of a high level
Famous
designer.
architect, or yeah,
Right,
or something
famous
like that.
architect.
Yeah, yeah,
So, I
yeah.
mean, I think he's like the real deal. And again, that is part of the problem with Maine is that Democrats have often seemed as if they were from Portland and not
Yeah,
from real Maine. So
yeah,
again, this is a working class voter situation. But the other thing I would add is in Texas, Beto never won in any of those polls, right? There was never a poll with
correct.
Beto up. It was always like tight.
Yep,
Whereas here, we're seeing a lot of polls where the Democratic candidate is up. And
yep.
Paxton, even though he worked very hard to destroy Cornyn, and
Yeah.
he definitely did it, seems like he does not have his heart in this thing anymore.
Yeah, that whole part is a little hard for me to quite get a handle on. I have not. We have at TPM, we have talkingpointsmemo.com. You should check out
Yes.
our amazing news website. We have covered his scandals forever,
Right.
but I don't think we've ever. I mean, again, it's attorney general, right? So
Right.
it's not like it's a top tier race with national implications. So we have never covered one of his campaigns.
Mhm.
So he's a kind of a weird guy. Maybe this is him being hardcore. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely true in a lot of these previous cycles. Democrats think it's a good year. If we're, tied or a point or two behind, motivation is gonna carry us through. But it's true. They are ahead in most or possibly even all of these races. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So again, it is always good to be running like you are behind, because there's no downside to stacking on a few extra points, right? But there's a big
Right.
downside to it's closer than you think, and there at least is limited evidence, less in midterms, but even a little in midterms, that some Republican voters are harder to get to. So, but it certainly looks pretty good. I would say, I guess my hunch is about where the sort of the big modeling prognosticators are. And by that,
Right.
I don't mean supermodels. I mean people who
Right.
are actually looking at numbers, not Polymarket or something like that.
Right.
So yeah,
It's the
looking
polling
pretty
is an
good.
issue. But I want to go back actually to something you said at the beginning of this because I think it's worth talking about for another minute, which is the political class does not realize how unhappy normal people are and
Yeah.
how Trump is getting blamed for all of this. And I think that's right. And I'm very surprised by that. Like you look at these numbers and they're astonishing, right? I mean, there's
Hmm.
not any wish casting here. It's just like astonishing. And when you see Trump get up and do stuff, it is like exactly the opposite of the stuff he should be doing, right? Like taking the E. Jean Carroll thing to the Supreme Court again. He's going to the Supreme Court for the ballroom again. He's going like at every point he's gonna go, hang out with Kim Jong Un now. Why? Because he thinks it might help him maybe in Iran? I mean, just at every point you're like, "Huh?" Like, if you're Susie Wiles, like, how much Pepto-Bismol must you be taking?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things happening with Trump. One is that I think he's definitely in his YOLO phase, and
Right.
he kind of he kind of cares about the investigations, but kind of doesn't care,
Right.
right? He's making big money, and they dealt with the investigations in 2019 and 2020. I think they'll be dealing with a somewhat different Democratic caucus now. But in
Yeah.
any case, I also think that he is just very isolated.
Right.
And that is, I think, the even bigger part of the equation. There's things like, kind of saying where, clearly you have these aircraft carriers that have been on these extremely long deployments, whether it is exactly as bad as we're here, who knows, but it
It
is
doesn't
clearly not great.
right.
Even simply being on a deployment for that long without any shore calls,
Right.
will start to kind of wear away at a crew. And when you say things like, "No, it's fine. They need more time," it's just people hear that, and that is it's weird. And you're right. He's doing all the things you would expect you would expect him to do to make his situation worse. I will say this, that if you go back to, for those of us who've been doing this for a really long time, if you go back to 2006, all the available evidence for a long, long time was that the Republicans are going to get crushed because Bush is really unpopular. The Iraq War, I'm losing track of
Yeah.
our Middle
Mhm.
Eastern wars. The Iraq War is super unpopular. The polls show it's unpopular, and Democrats are winning all these off kind of special elections and stuff
Specials,
like this.
yeah.
But you got very deep into the fall until the political class kind of woke up to that. It
Yeah.
was treated as, can Democrats really do this? It's, they're going to whiff and all this kind of stuff. And in some ways, they grabbed onto this, what was for people who were around the time, the Foley scandal, to say, oh, okay, we weren't wrong before, this new thing happened. In any case,
Right.
the political class not quite waking to these things is not uncommon, and I think that's for a
Right.
few reasons. One is that they are heavily based in New York and DC. DC is its own political microcosm, and it's in a
Mm.
lot of ways heavily wired for the Republican Party. And the other thing is that, in a way that I think is hard for people to quite grasp, a lot of the political class lives within the sort of mental anxiety world of Democrats.
Yeah.
So they are hearing sort of simultaneously all the angst and fear and worry of Democrats and all the trash talk of Republicans.
Right.
So again, it's not that strange. And frankly, uh, you're talking about a level of unpopularity here that is, as you say, unprecedented in modern history right before an election.
Yeah. It is interesting. I mean, I wonder about that too, because I have this interesting thing, which is that I've noticed a lot of and again, this is just real talk. This is not, but from what I see socially, a lot of very rich Democrats have decided to become Republicans over taxes in Israel. And they probably were that way and not honest about it before the October 6th stuff, but
Hmm.
now they've become radicalized and are convinced that anti-Semitism is everywhere and coming for them. Now,
Hmm.
I don't see that. I mean, I think that's nuts, and I think Republicans are not gonna be the people who protect the Jews from the fact that, like, a good 50% of the party is anti-Semitic, maybe more. But there definitely is a section of people who are like that now, which is, I mean, I don't think it's statistically significant, but I think it's certainly part of the donor class.
It's certainly part of the donor class. I think where you see it, I mean, obviously the people most worked up about anti-Semitism tend to be Jews, by
Right.
just the ones who are most concerned about it. And I think anti-Semitism in this country right now is a very real issue and a big deal. I don't think the Republicans are going to save us Jews from it. And where I do think you're right that it comes into play is that in New York City, among the very wealthy in New York City, and then kind of in the sub oligarch class, especially among a lot of Jews, they're sort of, they used to be, it was comfortable for them to be Democrats, and now it's
Right.
it's not. And a lot of them have become radicalized. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
And you see that showing up in a lot of ways. But what it comes down to is, you don't a lot of what is inspiring the kind of elite Northeast conversation, where the big thing is Zoran Mondani, various kind of, litigations of aspects of trans politics and all these kind of things. In the rest of the country, there is a profoundly negative mood that is heavily tied to the economy,
Yeah.
heavily tied to gas prices, which are the proxy for the economy, and just this sense that there are no rules anymore, and everybody's upset, and that just runs very deep. And certainly a lot of what Trump is seeing in his numbers right now. I mean, some of that is just that Trump sucks, right?
Yeah.
And
It's
people are kind of
terrible.
seeing
Yeah,
that again. But
yeah.
it's not just
It's
that.
always been
It's also
terrible.
that people are just really upset about the state of the country,
Right.
and Trump is getting even more of that because he seems to be fairly indifferent to the things that they are upset about, and
And
certainly
cashing in
arguably.
on it
Yes, 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 yes. So, I think that DC and New York, despite all the things that they are upset about, are kind of in a bubble when it comes to what the rest of the country is
is
upset
upset
about. And
about.
there's some
Yeah,
overlap, but
not a
not
ton.
necessarily that much.
And when I think about, it's funny because we were talking about Iowa before, and Trump has sent his people out on the trail now. So he's got RFK Jr. and he's got Pete Hegseth. He's got all people who are not supposed to be on the trail, right?
Yeah,
People who
yeah,
work for the federal government, who are taxpayer dollars, or who are supposed to be dealing with the diarrhea lettuce or
yeah,
the 6 wars that he's launched. Those
yeah.
people are now campaigning, and I think about Iowa, and here's a state where the Democrats in Iowa are running, as sort of nonpartisans, right?
Mhm.
Like Rob Sand,
Which they have
right?
to. Yeah,
The
yeah,
brand is bad, and Rob
yeah.
Sand is saying, I'm not he just is very thoughtful about the way he's doing it.
Mhm.
He says he's a prairie populist, we're seeing this same with Josh Turek, and then you have Pete Hegseth going to Iowa to criticize Democrats and to be very partisan and very MAGA. And I wonder in Iowa if that's actually not the move.
Yeah, there's an argument that that they may be in a position that just need to turbocharge their people, right?
Right.
Even though their people are in a minority at the moment, at least possibly in the context of this
Mm.
election. It's some of it is that Trump has just got himself in a really, really bad situation with this war he started for basically no reason at all.
Yes.
And there aren't he doesn't have a lot of good options, and he's characterologically unable, even in the way that politicians are sometimes able to do, to kinda say like, "Okay, bad move. Let's unwind this. Let's
Yeah.
call this a day." He's just unable to do that. So I'm not totally sure they have a better card to play, but, what I try to tell people sometimes when the shoe's on the other foot, sometimes you're just fucked, right? And you don't have a lot of good cards to play. And what another thing I always tell me, every losing campaign looks like it's run by idiots. But sometimes you're in a jam. And I think they are in a jam. We just don't know quite how much they're in jam. But again, to the point, Trump seems to want to just lean into the image and the reality of himself as an aging, out of touch man who does not care what is bothering you. You need to
Uh,
shut up because you should be loving him, and if you're not, you're the problem.
Correct. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Josh Marshall.
Thanks for having me. As always, I appreciate it.